Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And a problem, it's not a problem I can solve, but it's a problem I have, is how dadgum cold it's been. When we're in the green room, Kizzy and Camden are sitting here making fun of me. Camden's down in the desert, and Kizzy's down in tropical paradise. And I made the comment that her poor folks up in Michigan are suffering too. So, mom and dad, yes, yes. uh, it is, like I said, I guess you could call it a problem, but it's not really. I mean, my house is heated. I put on a coat when I went for my walk this morning. So, Camden, I mean, you probably have to roll up your sleeves before lunchtime today, right?
Yes, sir. I know that's the problem. All joking aside, I know I can't complain about my weather to you, Dad, because you get snow up there. But this is what I call that true desert time of year, where you never know how to dress, because it's going to be cold at night still, but I'm also going to be sweating during the day. We get those wild temperature swings this time of year, so I am still struggling. Again, I don't know if we want to call it a problem, Dad. I think I can solve it if it is a problem, but we're all right out here.
Oh yeah, yeah. Kizzy, I know that you were just bragging about the beautiful weather that you're having. Is that a problem? Is the air conditioner a problem for you?
There's no problems here. It's fine.
No problems in the
Folks,
world.
well, that's what I said. That's why I said she's in paradise because there's no problems here.
There's no
That's
problems.
There you go. There you go. That is the truth. And I want to jump in because I'm always fascinated by this because it's actually I find it my experience has been pretty rare. You got into government contracting from the basically from the get go, right? Right after getting your PhD, you went into the government space, and I'm always fascinated by that because for me, as a military guy, it was my career and it was an easy step, right? Take the uniform off, basically do the same thing. What drew you into that space with Lockheed? I think wasn't that where you started off? Was Lockheed?
Yeah, it's funny because I I always forget about Lockheed Martin because because I was working on my master's degree, and in order to earn your master's degree from Florida Institute of Technology, you could either write a thesis or you could complete a practicum. There were a certain number of hours that you needed to put in. It had to be approved, and I decided I wanted to do both. And I ended up at this summer, I think it was a summer internship with Lockheed Martin because there was a woman who was connected to that department who I think she had a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. So I'd reached out to her and said, "Hey, I'm looking for an internship because I want to do both a thesis and an internship." And she was like, "Oh yeah, we are looking for interns over the summer." I think it was like in their HR department, and they have specific projects for interns, and it was definitely like a realistic preview of life there. And depending, maybe they want to hire you, maybe they didn't. So I was only there for like 3 months, but it was still cool. I mean, I realized I never wanted to work. I mean, I kind of already knew, but it solidified I didn't want to work for a company, for a big corporation. It was nice. We met the CEO, who he's since long retired, and it was nice to meet the other interns. But what was most fascinating about that were the employees, and to see like some of them were not really happy or just how their lives were. And I'm like, my whole life is not about work. So, but I had no idea about like the government part. As odd as
Mm.
that sounds, like the task I was involved in, I mean, this was many years ago, and it was like coming up with interview questions, reviewing information. So it had nothing to do with, oh, this is our project with the Army or this is our project with the Navy. It was just kind of like, okay, like where I was, they did a lot of tech. and they didn't really talk about necessarily the end customer. It was a lot of, here's what we want you to do for this intern project. And it was like a proper internship program. So there were different, we had like a group project. We had to present it to the CEO. It was that kind of experience.
What was it that drove you towards the government contracting space in general? Because I think that you kind of hinted at it. But that's one like I didn't know you could do it if you weren't a veteran. Like I figured that's just like where veterans go to get jobs after they get out of the army. You know, how did you find that in the first place?
Again, so I I was always about like, oh, you're going to pay me. So that was what was great about that internship is it was actually paid. It paid really, really well. And it was in Orlando. Lockheed Martin, I think it was, yeah, LMS, whatever it was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But so I had taken 2 years off in between my master's degree and PhD. So when I resumed the PhD program, I had to reapply. They didn't just let me in. This is not some online program. It's a very prestigious program. So it was like my last year and a half. So I'm working on my dissertation, and they posted that they were they had these positions at Patrick Air Force Base available, these research positions. If you're interested, you should apply. So I was like, oh, it pays well. It's inside. It gives me experience. I'm like, I get to support the military because my dad was in the Army and brothers in the Navy and all this kind of stuff. So I was like, oh, this would be really cool. So I actually didn't get the first position, but then they called me back for the summer. And they were like, we would like for you to help this summer researcher. So all I know is, oh, okay, great. And you're going to get paid through the university. Oh, okay. So looking back, basically what they did is they had these summer research funds, and they had given this professor a pot of money. Let's say they gave him $50,000. And then my money came from his summer research money, which came through his college in Tennessee. So technically, I was a graduate research fellow at Patrick Air Force Base, the OMI Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. However, I was paid through his college. So I never worked for the government. I never worked for the Air Force. My paychecks came from his school. So I was just kind of like, oh, this is interesting. Like I started to see like, oh, this is weird how they did all of this. And then when I was there, I took notice that there would be people who had served at DOME and then now they were contractors, or people who were about to retire. And I would hear them talk about, oh, I want to be a contractor. And at DOME, they service all of the services and the Coast Guard. So and the National Guard. So I came across people from every walks of life. I came across political appointees, admirals, like every walk of life at DOME. So I just knew like, oh, there's this contractor thing, but I hadn't put 2 to 2 together with my money through that college. I just was like, oh, I'm here to work. I'm going to finish my dissertation soon and get my big girl job and get money and get married, I guess. I don't know. I'm going to figure this out. So that's literally where my mindset was until Dr. McDonald, he approached me one morning because I had an office in J9, the research directorate. And he was like, Kizzy, because I wasn't Dr. Parks yet. He was like, heard you're graduating soon. I was like, okay. I was like, wow, I can't believe this man knows my name. Like, because he's the head of the research department. And I'm just this lowly, like, grad student. And he's like, oh, I want to keep you on. How much is it going to cost me? And I'm like, oh my God. So like in these cubicles, I'm supposed to throw out a number.
I was
and
going to
then
say, how bad did you lowball him on that? Because I can imagine that wasn't a great
I
offer.
never lowballed him because I was so uncomfortable and I didn't know. And it was like a little less than 100,000. He's like, oh, this is great. Yes. I'll have my admin get in contact with you. And then it was really interesting because then it turned into all these things that I had no knowledge about, which now thankfully I do, but it turned into government employees were envious. And like, again, my viewpoint was I was just there to do the thing. Like he saw something in me. He had the contract dollars and I ended up subcontracting for a company. HRT, out of the Virginia area. And then it just was weird, like the politics and managing things. But I was just like, oh, okay, whatever. It's just like, oh, okay. And while I was doing that, I did learn about how some government contractors were. And thankfully, I ran into some mentors who were like, this is great that you're providing diversity and inclusion and analyzing data to the government. But they were like, you're going to, like, this is where you're going to stop. Like, where are you going to go? And also, as I was observing the diversity and inclusion space, I mean, it's a hot topic. It's hot right now. It's controversial. It's always been controversial. It's always going to be controversial because it's not going to go anywhere. You're going to have robots working. There's colorism. There's weight. You're going to have things with people who are autistic versus people who are not. There's always going to be something, whether people, have a good or bad or no kind of view about it. There's always going to be some type of diversity and inclusion topic. But the thing is, I realize in the landscape, I'm like, man, a lot of these people, they're coming in, they're getting this $1 million contract with the Marines or Navy, or, they're the flavor of the month. And I'm like, yeah, I'm the flavor of the month right now, but that's not a business. And thankfully, I pivoted into staffing and really started to learn what it took to win contracts, because it was just me. It was one full-time equivalent as a subcontractor under HRT's contract. And that was me. I mean, it was good money. And I'm also glad I did it because during the Trump administration, diversity and inclusion efforts were banned. So I would never, no matter the size of the contract. And it's not even about who's president. It's just being mindful as if you're involved in an area that's potentially controversial, no matter what it is. It could be green energy, it could be robots, it could be building walls, it could be diversity and inclusion. Like, you just have to be mindful that you're going to have to expand into other areas. Even Airbnbs, there's cities that are outlawing Airbnb. So how are you going to make money if you were depending on having a bunch of Airbnbs in, a certain city and they change the laws? So thankfully I pivoted, and that was just such a great point, because I didn't know. I just thought, okay, the government buys diversity. They buy all this stuff I see at DOME. I know they buy janitorial. I know they buy this stuff, and, I guess I'll do this staffing thing. So I started to dabble into that.
I would love to get your perspective because of your background with the psychology background, because you kind of touched on it in Lockheed, and the jealousy of a government employee versus a contractor, and the politics and all that sort of stuff. Could you give us a little perspective on that culture? Because I have a feeling that culture that you experienced was a huge driver to show you the way to find something else to do.
It was. And also, I want to make it clear, this is not a ding against DOME or Patrick Air Force Base, which is now, Patrick Space Force. It's just my view, my perspective as a person who I literally just wanted to go there. At that time, I just wanted to make people happy and do what I needed to do. That's what I wanted to do. So what I discovered at Patrick, especially DOME, was that you had these like class system where, of course, you have military officers, right? And DOME tended to have a lot of officers. And then you would have, you had enlisted personnel. We didn't have any privates or anything. I mean, it was pretty, we didn't really have that. And then I noticed that you had government employees. And what I recall was a lot of like, well, I'm not doing that. That's not in my job description, or that's not part of my agreement. I'm not moving that. You need to ask a military member. And so I'm just observing. I'm just like, okay, I guess you don't lift boxes. I guess they must have some kind of contract as a government employee, because I don't know. I was in graduate school for industrial organizational psychology. You said you wanted a summer researcher, and then you want me as a subcontractor. How would I know these things? There's no training. I'm not getting, anything on it. And then I also noticed the students. So DOME is a schoolhouse. So then you would have these students coming in, which was always spicy, because it's like that mentality when you go to school or you go to a conference, people are in the woo, too, right?
Right.
You have the people that are like, nobody's going to know what I'm doing here. And then you have the other people that aren't like that. And you have, so then that was like, wow, this is different, because they would have all of these students coming through. I think not all of the students were enlisted. I think they had both. Remember, all the services, Coast Guard, National Guard, Army, Air, like everybody under the sun who was connected to equal opportunity or diversity and inclusion would come through DIOMI. So as time went on, what I started to see was like this weird jealousy. Like there was this one particularly older government contractor who, she was retired Army. And then there was a bit of this jealousy, like, oh, I was mad when I found out how much you made. Like, who cares? I have to pay taxes. It's like, and you're a government employee and you already have one retirement. Like, it was weird envy. It was just, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. I didn't really have anyone to walk me through it. And so I just resorted to what I thought you did, is make everybody happy, which is not a great approach. And it taught me so much, because it got really ugly, where I've never even really publicly talked about this, but where the powers that be were coming down on the research department. And not just the research department, but everybody, like checking to see if people's cars are in the parking lot. And it was just very strange. Like, just even though I'd been there maybe a couple of years, it's like, is this really the priority? Like, are people in their offices working, and whose cars in the parking lot? And shouldn't the real focus be on students and what they're learning and being able to apply it, and that their leaders don't think this is bullshit, or excuse me, some BS, if you want to cut that out.
No, you're all right.
Like so it got really, really ugly. And there was this lieutenant colonel that came for me really hard. She, and I didn't get it. I remember meeting with her at the mess hall, because it was really close to DIOMI. And she was telling me, I feel like her husband did something with helicopters. I don't really remember. And so she was like, basically asking, do I have work for her? Because that was something else that was strange. So I just became Dr. Parks. So I'm put at a level which often, I would be seated by admirals and generals, and, so it's very weird to go from Kizzy Parks, the intern, to Dr. Parks, here you are. And I'm like, what happened? This is crazy. And then people would constantly ask me questions like, are you hiring? What can I do for, and I'm just like, am I hiring? Like, you could be, not to say they could be my parent, but I'm just like, you're retiring from the military. Am I hiring? I don't know how to answer this. No, but what? So it was weird. So this particular lieutenant colonel, she had asked me like, oh, can you do something for my husband? And I was just like, dude, like, I don't even know anything about government contracting. I just have this one contract. And she just really, for whatever reason, didn't like me. And she just was heavily scrutinizing everything that I did. But God always has a plan. So it's like, there are always more for you than those against you. And what was beautiful was, as I earlier talked about, I started to pivot. So I had already started to look into other contracts, getting mentors. And I knew, and I got this set aside that's called the 8A set aside. And so the DIOMI work was great. I had it for several years, and they ended up removing me from the subcontract, which I'm sure that person had a lot to deal with. But also, I don't think she was promoted because she really did cause a lot of drama. I honestly don't, and it's not to shame her or anything, but it was just really weird. It's like, out of all the stuff going on in the world, this is what you're doing, is coming after this one contractor. But also, again, I wasn't who I was, so I made for an easy target. But I had already transitioned, and so we, I think it was like literally right around the time they removed me from the contract, I ended up winning I got a $4 million sole source contract from the USDA. So it was perfect timing. I haven't looked back. I'm still in contact with Dr. McDonald. He's amazing. He really has helped mentor me a lot, but I don't do anything with Diomi but it did teach me a lot. It taught me a lot about the power of perception.
Mm-hmm.
Because if people perceive something about you, that's reality. And while you could easily say, but wait a minute, you were a subcontractor. Who cares about lieutenant colonel or the government employee? Yeah, they all have pull. You're in their house. And so now I'm very aware of that with every single contract that we get. We're always guests. We're always guests. And even if we have somebody on the team who used to work there as an employee, you're no longer an employee there. Or if you serve there, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if one of the people on our contract, your best friend, we're always guests. So I'm so grateful for that experience because it was wild. And I didn't really understand the dynamics of what was going on during the heat of it all.
Talking about those different dynamics there, and sorry, I know you got something else, but I want to stay on the psychology piece for a second there, because what comes to mind, you're talking about those different groups of people, looking at each other, like, oh, look how much money Kizzy making, or they're making, these different types of things. Like, even you threw it back at her, like, well, look at your retirement. Like, obviously, everyone can look at that different way. It makes you think of the quote, comparison is the thief of joy. When you look to compare those things, you're just going to think about how bad you've got it. But then with your background in diversity and equity, that also makes me think that you have this need for comparison as well. Because if we're not comparing anything, well, then you're never going to know that I'm making 3 times as much money as you. Gosh, sorry, I'm stumbling with my words. But so could you talk a little bit about trying to find that balance to where it's like you need the comparison because we need to know what needs to change. We need to know how to move forward to make things more equitable. But at the same time, if you're constantly comparing, then you're never going to be happy.
Right. I mean, you nailed it on the head in that you're never happy if all you do is compare.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say with my personal situation, a lot of that was just this insecurity and scarcity of the people there.
Mm-hmm.
Because and this was a big lesson for me. I didn't realize that people would retire from a duty station and then bam, get either a government job or a contract job. I didn't know this because like my father had served 4 years in the Army. So, I had no idea. And so there were a lot of people in that particular location that were it was like a warm blanket or those comfortable jeans. Like, so somebody comes along and it's like, whoa, what is this? You're messing up everything, I guess. I don't know. But there's definitely a need for a balance because, when I was doing a lot of diversity and inclusion, what was helpful and what was eye-opening was to see the trends. Like, here are the different assignments that would lead to promotions or things of that nature. And to be able to see that and see how some groups benefited maybe more than others and to be aware of statistics and things of that nature. But then at the same time, and this is something I've always been very passionate about, it's at an individual level. Like, not everybody wants to be an admiral or general or a colonel or a lieutenant commander, or maybe they just want to do 4 or 5 years. Maybe they only want to do 10 years. And that's the piece that I think is often missing from the conversation around diversity and inclusion is it's on the person too. Like, a person has to decide, hey, I want to do more. And this is for anything diversity and inclusion. This is not about race and gender. This is anything. So it was something I would bring up. And the other thing that often that we would talk about at Diomi would be like the impact of power and things of that, impact of like social activities, because that's something that people don't think about either. Like, if the people kind of in the know are golfing and you don't golf, I'm just using golf because it was Patrick and they have a golf course.
Yeah.
So,
Florida, we get it.
Right. Or if they were into drinking and you didn't really drink, or they all had kids or their wives were friends or whoever their spouse is. So it's like that piece too is often missing, but people have to come to terms with that because either you play the game or you don't, but you can't be mad because this is what the game is. Like, it's just how it is. And it's not unique to the Department of Defense. It's not unique to the United States. It's across the world because we psychologically speaking, ducks pick ducks. We like people like us. We like people in our in group. We like people we have something in common with, and people we don't have anything in common with is an outsider, or we perceive them as you're trying to take something from me. It's a zero-sum game. Why are you trying to take what I have? So it's like it's not a U.S. thing. It's across the world. I mean, I can't really think of any place off the top of my head where it's like, oh, they're the poster child for equity. So I always talked about a balance. And one thing that was really awesome about Diomi, I don't think that they're in charge of this anymore, but they were in charge of the climate surveys. So I think it was I don't remember, 9 months, 3 years, 1 month, something like that. The leader in the DoD would have to do a climate survey. So it would ask about like organizational effectiveness and all these different dimensions and perceptions of discrimination and things of that nature. And I thought those were always really good because they were very, very telling. And often I would see like, oh, that person's in Army Times. Oh yeah, I remember hearing about it was called the DOX. I remember hearing about their DOX results, so it's not like, oh, this is a surprise, but it's just no different than private companies who may have an employee survey, or the federal government with their Voices of Employee survey or equivalent. So that's also key too, because it's not typically just, oh, it's something with diversity and inclusion. And it's usually a lot of stuff going on, a lot of maybe toxic things, or just weird leadership, or people they're just horrible, just horrible people. But you have people who are amazing too. You have amazing leaders, amazing people. But we as a species, it's much easier for us to complain than to give praise.
I would love to stay in that subject because it really touched on something that, when I was in the Army, I didn't quite see it. As I got more senior, I started to see it. And that is, you recommend promotion for the people right? It's like, oh yeah, I remember Otis. Otis was a great team leader. We worked together. We got along really together. I recommend him for promotion. And that has a trend that's not that I don't think there's a whole lot of public talk about it. There's some inner circle talks about it, of promoting people just like me.
Right.
Oh, look at the jobs that Otis did. Man, I did those jobs and look how I turned out. I'm great. I'm successful. So therefore I should promote him. What I'd love for us to discuss, because it's the same everywhere. It's not just a military thing, right? It's the same everywhere. How do we as leaders circumvent that so that we do have a diverse team, that we're not all yes men in our team, so that we have people from different perspectives so that we can be a better organization going forward?
All right, $1 million answer, Kizzy.
I mean, I would say in response to that, I have a question. Does a leader really want that? Because you have the politics part. So maybe they want a certain type of team because it's going to help them with their career trajectory. Maybe they want a bunch of yes people because it's going to get them to the next rank or the next position, or to get relocated to wherever they, is the hot spot for that company. So that's first and foremost, because a lot of people talk about, oh, we want, like, even if, for instance, even the people who are anti-diversity and inclusion, they're like, people should be, should all be based on their skill set. Okay, well, diversity and inclusion is not saying it shouldn't be. Okay, so let's run with that. It's based on their skill set. But you still have politics of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes leaders don't want people to outshine them. Sometimes.
So I got to stop you there. Yeah. I wouldn't call them leaders.
Yeah,
I would call them people in position of authority. Pardon me, but
I would say they're definitely people in position of authority, and maybe this is how they are. Or there was, I'm not going to share their name, but there was a company where they, very well known, And we provided diversity and inclusion training to them. My friends had a contract with them, and I subbed. And for them, it was all about we. They didn't like I people and me. It was always we. So then even that's kind of different, because so are we getting a bonus? Are we all getting the same raise? Are we getting the same vacation? Are we getting the same benefits package? I don't know. I mean, I was only there for the services I provided. But even that kind of culture is a little, unusual. And then you have, before Zappos was purchased by Amazon, you have Zappos that had these, this interesting dynamic within their company. So it's one of these things where if somebody truly wants to have, let's say, diversity, it's something where you got to make it happen, because it can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable to have somebody who's like, has a different viewpoint, or whatever it is about them that you think is different, whether it's visible or primary dimensions of diversity, or it's something that's secondary. It has to, it's things to think about. And then lastly, especially on the private sector side, is how does that link up with what their evaluation criteria are, or the bottom line? And maybe they want a certain team because it's going to help them more quickly achieve their quarter goals or their annual goals. So a lot of it is around the politics of that particular person in charge, the department, the location, all of those kinds of things.
I'll tell you, I've had people on my team in various times throughout my career, both military and business, that it was like, shit, they were hard to have on the team because they would ask those questions that needed to be asked, by the way, so that we could have a better plan, better product, better outcome. But damn, it made it hard. But you know what? I was grateful looking back on it, even right now, thinking about those people, looking back on it. And I'm grateful for that. But damn it. I mean, go back to your team of yes men, that's a lot easier when everybody's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, Otis. I agree with you, man. And even not in the fake yes man sort of thing. They're like, yeah, they think the same way, right? So because they think the same way, when you say something, we ought to do it this way, they're all like, oh yeah, that's exactly like I was thinking. And then you got those one or two people that are like, hey, wait a second. And they made it hard, but they made it hard in a good way. And I think that, to me, that is something when we start talking about, and I try very hard not to be that color person, gender person. I just want that dude in the nondescript, whatever the dude is, to do a damn good job. Right? That's what I want. Ask me hard questions. Go fix things. I don't care who you are, what you are. So that mindset is hard to come by. Right? And so I thinking about this, do you have any thoughts or maybe even techniques or hell, a book that might say, read this, look at that. If you're to get back away from I want a whole bunch of former Green Berets on my team so that we're all like, yeah, great idea. I don't want that.
I just want to throw it out. This might help you answer, because you might be a great launching point for you. You might disagree with this. I want to hear your thoughts on this, though, because as you were asking your question there, Dad, what came to mind is the same kind, thinking about those mechanisms as a leader. Like, what can you do to build this inside of your team? What does that literally look like? Well, it makes me think of the pre-mortem, which we use, I'm a big fan of, we talk about on the show. But doing a pre-mortem, we're not trying to be negative all the time, but this Friday from 1 to 3, we're going to be negative. And we're going to poke every single hole we possibly can and find all those negative things. You have to and you talk about those people, asking the hard questions. The reason you as a leader might not want somebody asking those hard questions is because you're so stressed and freaking out about all this stuff that you don't have time to think about those things. It's almost like you need to, the pre-mortem's one example, but you need to have like planned discomfort. Like every now and then we're going to go through and dive deep into all these things. But then when we're outside of that, we have to make sure we're all still working towards the same goals. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Kizzy? You know any of those tools besides the pre-mortem?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's much easier to add to the toolkit of a leader when it's their own business.
Mm-hmm.
Because a leader or a person put in charge, they're doing what they're reinforced to do. So even if it's, hey, you should look into, like, it could be, why do you keep recruiting from Florida State? Oh, well, I went to Florida State. Okay, well, what about University of Michigan? What about Georgia? What about LSU? No, and then, but maybe the company's like, okay, we don't have a problem with it. We have our group that goes every year. We get great students. Why should we fix it? It's not broken. And we always have problems getting people from Michigan anyways. There was this one time 3 years ago, so we don't want to do that, Kizzy. Like, we're just gonna keep the people from Florida State. So it's like, it's all about what they're reinforced for. So that kind of makes it very prickly in those kind of environments, because there's ways to open up their viewpoint. What I have found is, usually if it's a leader that the company values or they're high up and they're not being inclusive, then they usually are voluntold to have a coach. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that. I've seen some situations where, they may let them go, or they may move them, or they don't do anything at all because maybe they're still meeting their targets. So, but as a business owner, we have way more control and we have more runway to grow. And so, because we own the companies, or if you're the majority owner of something, or if you're an investor, there are things that you can do because you have more power and authority. So I can't put out there one book or one technique, because it's so at the individual level, and it all depends on what are they being reinforced for? If they're being reinforced to be a jerk, then why would they change that? Why?
It reminds me of, we've had this conversation a bunch around, not necessarily just business leaders, but I think I always like to put into a specific bucket because it's easier to be mean to them a little bit for this example, but of like the finance bros, the, really hardcore sales, those kind of areas of things, because what you get into is this incentive problem where you are kind of incentivized to take a lot of risk and not necessarily be that good at your job. And so then it's like, well, I took the biggest risk, so I won, so I get promoted over Otis. And it's like, okay, well, then I keep taking those risks. And you wind up somebody who just gets lucky all the way up, and they don't necessarily have the skills for that problem. Could you talk some about trying to, maybe staying in the business world, because, like you said, it's a little bit easier of a problem to deal with, but of trying to realign those incentive structures so that you're bringing people up who can solve those problems rather than people who, just look like they were doing a good job?
I mean, it all is based on the structure of the company. I mean, if you have a board of directors, then, I mean, you're at their will, like, so if you're somebody who's like a small business owner, you have fewer than 300 employees, or you're the majority owner, maybe you're the co-owner, you have a lot more authority. So you can come up with, how are you going to reinforce people? Is it that you're going to reinforce, okay, so a leader grew other employees. Maybe that's one of the targets, is professional development of the team. Maybe it's having a bench of potential leaders, or, it's at that kind of a level, because if one isn't reinforced to bring on different views or thought leadership, or they're not reinforced to grow and develop people, then why should they? I mean, it's even in companies where, like, there's this woman, I've been mentoring her for a really long time. and she's good. Like they're all about like going through their leadership programs and very formal, and she had this mentor who was really like trying to hold her back, and so I helped her through that situation. And it's like, the woman's coming from the viewpoint of what has worked for her and what she's being reinforced for. So if you're caught up in a system like that, it makes it really hard. So for those of you that do have some kind of control, then you're going to have to reevaluate your appraisal system, or if you don't have one, create one. You got to really look to see, do you really want people to grow and develop? Because some people are like, why aren't you working? Why are you going to this training? Like, you can't say you want people to grow and develop, and then you're asking them, why are you going to this training? Why are you going to this conference? What did you learn? Did you write an after action report? Or, it's like, okay, well, but that's great. Or if they're all pissed off all the time because somebody's trying to make themselves better. And then lastly, there was a woman who I'd mentored on the government contracting side under Gov Con Winners. And one of the reasons she entered government contracting is she was pursuing to be like a CPA. And one of her coworkers said, even if you become one, it doesn't matter. You're not going anywhere in this company. Like, we're not going to pay you more. And so, and probably many of your listeners have heard that before too, where it's like, this is your position, no matter what you do, this is how it is. And so it's like, well, if that's how they set things up, then you got to either find magic elsewhere, or you make the decision that I'm just going to suck it up and deal with this.
Let's talk a little bit about Gov Con Winners and how you shifted into that business, and really what was the catalyst? What made you say, all right, let me shift into this space and do it this way?
In the very beginning, it was during like lockdown time, and I would go into Clubhouse, and there were these like groups on government contracting. And there was something.
I remember Clubhouse.
I was going to say, Clubhouse had a hell of a 8 months right there.
It did. It was like nonstop. And there were a few like contracting officers. I mean, they said they were contracting officers. I'm hoping they didn't lie. And so, I would listen to these people, and I was like, wow, I've never heard people in government contracting talk like this. Like, it just didn't sound right. I was like, something's wrong. So I was like, okay. And then around this time, I knew that I needed to be more visible, and my platform of choice was LinkedIn. And so I was like, man, I really need to figure out this posting videos on LinkedIn or something like that. And so as these worlds are colliding, what also did it for me is I got these a phone call and a meeting. And the phone call was like, hey, I can help get you contracts, and then you can pay me. And I was like, well, what contracts are you getting me? And they were like, they couldn't really answer me. And they're like, well, I took this class with so-and-so. Again, I'm not here to slander anybody. And they're like, I took this class with so-and-so, and this person said that you get paid to find people contracts. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure you can, but I'm like, where is this contract? What is this thing? And there was nothing. And they genuinely, I don't know what they were thinking, but they really believed what they were doing was going to lead to all this money. And I was like, okay, it's crazy. Then I had another person who wanted to talk to me, and they're like, oh, we heard you're 8A, you're graduating, so we want to take on your contracts. And I was like, okay, so you're an 8A? No. And I'm like, why are we talking? Like, I was just like, why do these people have this weird misinformation? Because when I lived in the Melbourne area, Orlando is very close. It's like anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, and it's a huge hub for government contracting. So I came across all these different types of government contractors, from solopreneur to Lockheed Martin to Raytheon, and nobody ever acted like that. So I was like, okay, clearly this has become a cash cow. People are selling how to win contracts, and they're selling these weird dreams and desires. I'm like, I got to get out there and do something. So I started putting content out. And what was beautiful, and that's where Gov Con Winners came into existence. And what was beautiful was I learned so much along the way, because often when you're mentored based on what the person did to achieve their success. And so everybody pushed me, like, you want to have services contract, you want staffing, you want a big building, you want this. I mean, I didn't do the big building thing, but they were like, you want this is what you want butts in the seat, Kizzy, this is what you want. And I was like, oh, okay. So as I started putting out videos, I came across this guy, David, and we met in 2019, shortly after I had foot surgery. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I do mentoring. I got into government contracting. Your name was on a list, and I can't believe it. You don't, like, we only live like 50 blocks from each other in Miami Beach. And he was like, I do staffing. I mean, it's not religious staffing. So again, this was like a little bit before the COVID stuff, but I was like, interesting, religious staffing. He's like, yeah, you can get like Catholic positions, and you can get priests and rabbis. And I was like, oh my God, that's right. Like Patrick had a chapel. And I was like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense. And he started talking about these other contracts that he did. So then I was like, wow, there's this whole other world. So then we ended up winning our first religious position, I think later that year. Then COVID, all the weird people calling me and reaching out, got all my content is in full force. And I also started learning from other people who would reach out to me, because again, the federal government spends over $800 billion a year, but they spend it on so much. And so I also started learning more about these other areas, like the government publishing office, gpo.gov. I had no idea about, because I don't sell printed goods, and I was like, wow, this is a whole cool thing. I didn't know about dibs. And it's like, it's amazing, because I've been awarded over $50 million in federal government contracts. And it's like this whole new world opened up too. So it was twofold. It was the most important piece was to help people and to put out more information for free than anybody on my YouTube channel under Kizzy Parks, Kizzy M. Parks, that blonde hair in the picture, just to help them. So people just know, here's the bare bone basics. This is how I get into government contracting, right? And then also it's been great to learn and to create this community. I have a Facebook group where I have this beautiful community, because presently a lot of people want to be what's known as a middleman, basically subcontracting. They want to sell products. Basically, like, people have been sold this pipe dream that government contracting is so easy, and I mix three things.
Just a cash cow. All you got to do is milk it every morning.
Right. It's a cash cow. You milk it. And so I like to provide the reality that it's a little bit more complicated than that. Yeah. So I do have
Folks, that is an understatement. I will, there's my PSA for Miss Kizzy today. It
truly is. Oh, go ahead.
I'm curious in that, we talked a lot about the personal problem that kind of feeds into these big systems and those kind of things. One thing that comes to mind there is this, because people view it as the cash cow, do you think that it attracts the wrong people? Like, it's like, it's the same kind of thing of like, if the person who wants all the leadership power probably shouldn't be the leader, you almost want the reluctant leader. Is that same kind of thing in government contracting space, where it's like people see the get rich quick scheme and they think that's what it's getting into, so it attracts everybody who wants the get rich quick scheme, which just makes it worse?
It does. Even before I knew how prevalent the whole get rich quick thing was, I remember this small business rep, and we were talking about this opportunity, and he's like, listen, I don't have any doubt in my mind that you can do this. He's like, however, if you messed up that contract, I would get dragged into my boss's office, my boss, everybody, and they would want to cancel it. But they said, but if we gave it to a Boeing, it would just be like, oh, that's okay, it's Boeing.
Mm-hmm.
So he was saying to me how there's these stereotypes around small businesses versus a large business. And I was like, okay, I got you. Like, I totally understand that. It's no different than, personally, why I always buy from Amazon, because I know I'm going to get it. I don't care if you have a website. I want to buy it on Amazon. It's just how I am. So I totally get it. So it's twofold, because you have that where you have government agencies that are like, oh my God, do we really have to give this to a small business? So you have that because maybe they were burned.
Mm-hmm.
So they were burned, or you have higher ranking government employees where they're looking for their retirement path. And often a higher ranking government employee, military, they want to go work for a Boeing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be part of a big speaker guild and get paid $100,000 per speech. So small businesses aren't necessarily offering that. Larger businesses. So then they're often more apt to want to just, can't we just put this on a large contract? Can't we just, So we have this. So we have the perceptions around small business versus large, because in the federal government space, there's no medium, y'all. It's only small or large. There's no medium. You're either small or you're large. So then you add in this get rich quick. It just makes it even worse in many instances, because an agency, they just want, like, here's a great example. I get this all the time in my group and in my DMs. This particular person won a contract to I think remove and install mailboxes. I think it was military. Well, they can't get the money. The subcontractor doesn't have the money. So now if I'm the government agency, I'm annoyed. So I put this out to bid. You thought this is going to be easy. You won it. Neither of you can get funding. You're not going to be able to do the work. And now I have to go back out, if I were the government, and rebid this because you didn't know what you were doing, because you thought it was some get rich quick scheme. And I see that time and time and time again, of just not thinking through, oh, I won this. Oh, I had to give it back. And I tell people, this is not a pet. This is not like you're giving it back. There's no giving it back. Like, you need to execute the work. So it really has jaded people. And it makes some of them, like, they get angry, especially if they come across me, which is fine because that has nothing to do with me. Their anger is that's between them and their God. But then they get angry because they come to me and it's like, well, Kizzy's saying something different. Yeah, because I have contracts and I have almost 100 team members. Like, I'm not just somebody who won a few contracts and now I have a cool funnel and I'm doing challenges all the time and I'm selling you on my stuff. Like, I'm letting you know how it really is. And so, the get rich quick has really had an impact on government contracting.
Yeah, there's you always hear about these horror stories. There was some lady, I think it was in Atlanta, that had won a contract to provide like 100,000 meals to Haiti after the earthquake or something like that, and it was literally her in her garage. Yeah, that's going to happen, and I think there's the point of that. Not what I learned, but the point of that for y'all is, don't let one apple spoil the barrel.
Mm-hmm.
Get that apple and put it out. Cut the cancer out, if you will, is another metaphor. But man, it does create that perceptions, which is what you talked about earlier, which is what I learned, because I love this phrase. And there is always more people for you than against you.
Always.
And you should always remember that. That is such a powerful thing to put in your pocket, your mantra, your affirmation, in your back pocket, in your front pocket, and move out with that every day.
Yeah.
Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, I think for me, in this kind of broad, because it touched on a lot of the different areas that we touched in our conversation, but that it goes back to like the person problem, the personal level, the self-selection issues, all of those kind of things are usually what's really going on. When we start talking these big systems, it's really easy that, I know we talked about on yesterday's show with Donnie, but it's like, it's really easy to go, it's a big bad guy, so it's a problem and I can't fix it because somebody is evil and in charge, and it's too big of a problem for me to do anything about. But when you start teasing it out as, the personal level, the self-selection, these internal bias, all these much smaller things, well, those give you levers that you can pull. Those give you ways that you can start to disentangle those ridiculously complicated problems and start to try to actually put some solutions together. So that was it for me. I think that's it's really easy to look at these big problems and try to do just these broad strokes, and we'll just do this and it'll fix everything. It's like, no, that's at the end of the day, it's just people, and you got to figure out what to do with those individual people.
It's so true.
Kizzy, how about you? What'd you learn?
What I really learned was from both of you, that emphasis on leader, especially the difference between like leader and person in place of authority. That was a huge one, because it's so true. You have a leader wants the best for, I think of somebody who wants the best for other people. They want the best for the team. Person who's in the place of authority, I mean, they just have the title, they're getting the pay, and they're just there to execute, and they don't care what happens along the way.
Yeah, awesome. How do folks find you? You mentioned the Facebook group, you mentioned your YouTube, your LinkedIn. What's the best way for folks to find you, get in touch with you, and learn what you got going on?
Well, I encourage you to get my book, winnerswaybook.com, winnerswaybook.com. It's going to teach you faster than doing it on your own on how to win profitable federal government contracts. So winnerswaybook.com, that's a great place to start. I would go there. You can also just go on YouTube, type in Kizzy M. Parks. You'll see my channel, and there should be a link in the description for the Facebook group. I would love for you to be part of the community. What's great about the book is I have stories, I have photos. There's such great, helpful information in there, and it has a ton of resources, tons of resources. Plus, there are free bonuses that come along with the book. I mean, for $19.99, you get the whole world. And then you have a great Facebook group where I have almost 9,000 people in my community who are there. And I do have active contracting officers. I have a lot of people in there. They may not respond. You may not even realize that they're there, but they are there. So it's a great group, because anytime you have a question or you just want to see what's going on, it's a great group to be a part of. So please, winnerswaybook.com, get that book, winnerswaybook.com.
All right, folks, and that'll be in the description in
sir.
our show notes. You can get it there also. Kizzy, it has been such a pleasure having you. Thank you for taking a little time off the beach to come inside in the air conditioning and sit with us.
Yes. No, I appreciate you too for doing all this. It's been an honor to be here.
Awesome. Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis, and a special thanks to our guest, Kizzy Parks, Dr. Parks, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass it along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes is available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.